Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start today by talking about the transfer of learning. This, I believe, is the elephant in the classroom, the thing that we would rather not talk about as educational researchers, educational psychologists, and educationalists. It's the thing that we assume happens, but does it? Because it seems to be, depending on who you read, a learning disability that we all share. And at the same time, simultaneously, it is the basis for all our systems of education and training. All our systems of education, training, qualification, recognition, progression, and so forth are predicated on the idea not only that learning transfer exists, but that we can control it. We understand it well enough to make it happen when we want to. And if it doesn't work like this, then learning transfer may very well be the educational crisis of our time. And you've never even heard of it, or may never even have heard of it. Now, I'm not going to begin with definitions of learning transfer, because as we'll see, that is part of the problem. What I'm going to begin with instead is a number of illustrative examples of learning transfer, as these authors on the screen have done. So first of all, a basic one, we have the tennis player who quickly masters squash. It's a commonsensical idea, something that we could all perhaps get behind. Squash and tennis, very similar games, requiring very similar psychomotor skills. Another example from the world of formal learning, you have the student who, having first mastered algebra, can progress on to things like calculus quite easily. Or again, the ability of a young maths student to transfer their knowledge of geometry to figuring out the area of the family home. Again, something commonsensical that we presumably can all get behind, and we presumably think happens all the time. Learning transfer also refers to some big deal kind of stuff as well, like the whole world of scientific discovery, the kind of analogical thinking that can lead us to apprehend lightning as being like a big spark, or the process of metal rusting as being like slow combustion. And then the development of other scientific theories by analogy, like, for example, the planetary model of atomic structure. So what's the problem, you might be thinking? You might be sitting there saying, well, I'm transferring fine, thank you very much. What's the issue? The issue is this, as the first quote says, most research on transfer has been bad news for educators. It gives the impression that transfer usually doesn't happen. Okay? Douglas Detterman, an intelligence theorist and probably the most widely quoted of the critics of traditional learning transfer, he says this. This is after a review of 100 years plus of experiments and research into learning transfer. He says this. Most studies first fail to find transfer, and second, those studies claiming transfer can only be said to have found transfer by the most generous of criteria. In other words, it often seems as if people are just following instructions, or else the transfer is questionable because the two contexts are extremely similar. And you would think, if I explained some of the experiments to you, that transfer would be found. So typical experiments, they give you the thing that they want you to transfer. They make sure that you've got it. They give you a hint, perhaps, that it's going to be of help to you in the transfer context. They give you the thing they want you to transfer to, and they sit back and wait for the transfer to happen. But it's very much a case of horse to water. So let's get a bit more critical about this research tradition. First of all, they typically only accept one correct answer. If you approximate the answer, that's wrong. You only get one shot. You only get one go. It's also about transfer between two fixed points. So they try to bring everything under experimental control, if you like, the thing they want you to transfer and the thing they want you to transfer to. You only get a limited exposure or practice with the thing they want you to transfer. And it generally follows random or convenient sampling with very, very large numbers. Summing up on this tradition, Bransford and Schwartz had the following to say, that it's a tradition that works well for studying full-blown expertise, but it represents too blunt an instrument for studying the smaller changes leading to expertise and leading to transfer. So we've got to turn this upside down, okay? So my approach, and you can see I've given myself ticks all the way down there, so that just shows I've got it all right. I reckon all interplay of prior learning and new learning efforts is of interest, or should be of interest to us. I think you should have a number of attempts, a number of goes at trying to transfer learning. And I have the attitude of just stepping back and seeing what happens, rather than trying to bring everything under experimental control. So participants are given the chance to bump up against things, to make mistakes, to test their mettle. And I don't follow random sampling. I follow purposeful sampling. I pick people according to my needs, or the needs of my study. And in the case of my study, this was mostly had to do with having people who were novices and having people who were experts. And it was in the space that opened up between these two groups that I began to get a different notion, I guess, of the interplay of old learning and new learning in the meeting of new learning challenges. My laboratory was that of computer and video games, which might seem like a strange choice, but it relates to older traditions in cognitive psychology of using puzzles, and in particular of using games like chess to study things like expertise, short-term memory, schemas, and so forth. And games offer a number of different advantages. They're very easily manipulated. You can move around the things in the game. You can make the game behave in different ways. You can tune it according to your needs. You can prompt people to have different kinds of experiences with it. But it's also simultaneously an authentic social practice. It is something that people really do. And when people really do play games, you get some very interesting and spontaneous examples of the interplay between new learning and old learning. And it has other advantages in terms of data generation. So you're constantly being prompted to do things as you play a game in real time, in a way certainly that chess does not make you do and television does not make you do. It has advantages in terms of recruitment. It is possible to find people out there who do not play computer and video games, and at the same time that doesn't have to bring some weird kind of extraneous variables with it for those people. And there's a number of advantages, as we'll see, in terms of data gathering. You can gather everything from the people as they're in front of the screen, down to the very keystrokes that they press. So these were the games I used in my research. On the top left-hand corner, there was a game where you had to follow a series of steps to escape a room. On the top right-hand corner, there was a high-fidelity racing game where players were given a force feedback steering wheel to use. On the bottom right-hand corner, there's a massive multiplayer online game where they interacted potentially with thousands of other human players. And on the bottom left is a shooter game that I'm going to show you. Now, as I'm showing you the video of somebody playing this game live, I'd like you to imagine that you are playing the game. And just think about whether you would do the same thing, whether you would have the same reactions, whether you'd take the same actions, okay? Here goes, fingers crossed. Okay, so imagine you're playing this game. Would you take the same actions? Would you try to do something different? Okay, anybody spot what happened there at the end? The trick was, although you may have imagined that you were controlling the character closest to the camera, you were actually in control of the character furthest away at the beginning. So this is a nice example of what I meant about how great games are in terms of us being able to very easily manipulate people's responses to them. So I was particularly interested here in creating a kind of a breakdown case, which would give me some sort of insight again into the interplay of old learning meeting new learning challenges. So basically what I did is I got the various different participants to play these games. They were thinking aloud as they were playing the games. I was watching them playing the game, and I had software that allowed me to tag particular moments that were of interest. Then subsequently, I sat down with the participants, and we talked it through. We looked at the things that I had thought were of interest, and they explained to me some more about them. You know, I asked them, why did you do that, or what did you mean by that, that kind of thing. And so I coded all of that up, where I looked at the stuff, and I might have said, well, that seems to be an example of somebody guessing. That seems to be an example of somebody being frustrated. That seems to be an example of somebody making a very specific reference to their prior learning. Coded that all up for the 4 games and for the 9 participants, and came up with something like this. I had 67 first-order codes, and these were subsumed into 4 new constructs, if you like. Those of preparedness, learning work, felt experience, and performance. Okay, so everything fitted into those 4. And I used that to build a model of what I thought was going on for people when they were playing these games. So let me explain each one of these in turn, and then sort of, as I'm doing so, gradually sort of build that model for you. So on the screen here, you see a kind of a cone shape that's meant to represent the idea that preparedness is increasing constantly over time. Of course it's not. That's a simplification. Contained within it, the kind of first-order codes or first-order behaviors that I included as part of it were things like an explicit reference to prior experience, a reference to contrasting cases, where somebody might say, well, it's a bit like this, but it's a bit like that. So after Bransford and Schwartz, I defined preparedness as the degree to which past experience and learning prepares learners to meet a learning or performance challenge, how it sets the stage for them to meet a new learning or performance challenge. It's not, however, a replacement concept for transfer. It doesn't take you all the way there. It kind of works something like this, okay? So this is an example from the world of perceptual learning. So how would you see or perceive Mr. Pac-Man if it was just shown to you like this? If you were asked to describe him, what would you say? That he was yellow, kind of round, maybe badly drawn, kind of thing? What about now, when you see him in this other context? It might even take you a second or two to locate him. Do other features or characteristics now seem to become relevant? What about now? Are there more things, again, that you might like to mention, such as whether he has a ribbon in his head or not, or how many eyes he has, or what color, or whether he has proper teeth or not, or what function one particular variety of Pac-Man might play over another? The point I'm driving at here is that experience with contrasting cases can change how we see and experience new events. We mightn't remember each individual contrasting case, but overall, they open us up to new forms of noticing. So the given, if you like, of a situation isn't always the given. So what about our game? Well, it works exactly like that. The better performing players were able to talk about some contrasting cases experiences that they had. They talked about how the game was a bit like a third-person shooter, a bit like a first-person shooter, but the camera was fixed, but this, but that. Another lower performing participant literally said, I don't like war games. End of story. And the higher performing players, they noticed more. They not only had the right language for it, but they noticed more. They noticed the mini-map up on the top right-hand corner, and they noticed it was accurate to the character in the distance, not the one closest to the camera. Okay, so the second concept, if you like, of the model there is the notion of new learning, which you can see I've kind of wrapped around the cone, and I have sort of, it's embedding into it there as well. So new learning is the literal work of learning. It's the conjecturing, the noticing, the prioritizing, the determining, and so forth that makes up learning. Distinguishing preparedness from new learning like this, I should say, has the benefit as well of explaining things that traditional notions of learning transfer have difficulty with. Like, why is it that it would seem that we're ready to carry out a particular act of transfer, but we don't? It's the fact that the wrong preparedness is getting called upon, if you like. Now, new learning and preparedness together obviously have a particular kind of comportment or directedness towards a particular kind of performance. So performance has to do with our notions of doing things skillfully, doing things the right way. It is it's an ordinary word, but it's simultaneously all that we do, but then a very, very specific way of looking at what we do. Very much a time-limited way of looking at what we do, and very much a criterion-based way of looking at what we do. I was not interested in the game we looked at, for example, in how many times the participants spun the character around, even though many of them did that, or how many times they jumped up and down before they got shot, which many of them did as well. That was not of interest to me. That was not of interest to the rule sets of the game or to the performance. So the notion of performance put that way is like something that gives shape to the interplay of new learning and preparedness. But it's not key. What's key to my mind is felt experience. So in that category were first order codes like exclaiming, being amused, references to their sense of control, their sense of disorientation. Player as critic referred to points in the game where they might have said, oh, this game is hopeless, it's not working properly, that kind of thing. It's not a summative metric, though. It's not how you felt about the game as a whole. It is essentially the live contours, the live and dynamic experience as felt. Okay? And my research suggests that while felt experience is something that traces the shape of the model as a whole, it plays an absolutely key role in negotiating the interplay between all of the elements and in calling on other aspects of our past experience from that deeper well of preparedness. Think of it as something like this, okay? Think of it as something that moves constantly. I'll pretend I deliberately didn't put a soundtrack on this so you can make up your own, okay? But imagine the sound of breathing maybe, or the sound of the wind, or the sounds of waves crashing in, or the sound of somebody roaring in frustration, if you like. But it's that notion of something changing over time, the live contours of the felt experience, tracing the entire interplay of the other elements there. So to understand how old learning helps new, I think we need to take a much bigger look than we have done in the past at people's cumulative past experience. This is going to return us, I didn't quite get onto it, but this is going to return us to older questions with regard to the influence of our bodies and brains, with regard to the influence of our shared socio-cultural practices. So there's a lot to look at there. But if we do take a bigger look at what we do when we face new learning challenges, we discover, I think, that there's no problem, empirically speaking. There's a lot going on all the time. There's a lot to tune into. And things like negative transfer, which is formally where past experience hinders your ability to meet a new learning challenge, that's no longer a bad thing as such, but just evidence of the ongoing negotiation between new learning and past learning. And then new questions begin to emerge as well, as we've seen, to do with felt experience. Takeaway points would be this. It's not about the performance or even the effort alone. Preparedness doesn't take you all the way there, but we are in the deepest sense prepared for this world. We belong to it. Learning is work, as we know, but no learning is lost. It all becomes part of the deeper wellspring of preparedness. And finally, to bring it back to the theme of the conference, how we feel about things is perhaps the most important and most misunderstood aspect of learning. We should not just try to learn better or perform better or be better prepared. We should, in a sense, try to feel better for the future. Thank you very much.